Now with the latest headlines this Thursday night, it's the ITV News at 10.
The Taliban tightens its grip on Afghanistan as thousands try desperately to flee. Kabul's airport continues to be surrounded by chaos and tension, while in the city, they take over the airwaves.
When the Taliban last ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001, they frowned upon television and imagery in general. Wind forward to today, and they're embracing 21st century technology. The key question, of course, is has the message changed?
But behind the propaganda, the reality for those living in Afghanistan and those trying to leave is terrifying.
I went to the airport gate and I saw Taliban, they were beating women and they beat my friends as well.
Also in News at 10 tonight, more shocking scenes of appalling conditions in Britain's social housing and the battle to get tenants' voices heard. Yet another footballing great, Dennis Law, reveals he is suffering from dementia. And
when a place like the National Gallery loses a treasure like Goya's portrait of the first Duke of Wellington, that's really sensational news.
60 years on, the mystery and intrigue of the stolen portrait of the Duke of Wellington.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. In their hundreds they came, desperate Afghans terrified by the reality of Taliban rule, heading for the airport, only to be confronted and constrained by Taliban fighters when they got there. Some Afghans with the paperwork are making it out for now, along with most Western nationals. Those who aren't on the list are not. But away from the airport, in the unseen corners of Kabul and other cities, there are reports that the Taliban have stepped up their hunt for people who worked with British, American and other NATO forces. Despite the propaganda, one UN document says the Taliban are going from door to door, terrorising their families if they are not there. It seems the Taliban is tightening its grip on the country, and not just by controlling the airport and the airwaves.
In Kabul right now, freedom is in the air, while on the ground it's far from guaranteed. The consequence is thousands of Afghans still trying to reach the airport here. The Taliban have promised safe passage to those who worked for Western countries and have been granted asylum. The problem is the thousands of other locals who don't qualify. They were met with volleys of shots in the air meant to disperse them. But still they descended on the airport in the vain hope of catching an evacuation flight. Outside abandoned and shuttered embassies, including this, the United Kingdom's, people are still waiting in the vain hope of getting transit papers. This family have been here since yesterday and say they want to get to Britain because they fear for the children's lives. This is another way the Taliban are trying to halt the attempted exodus. As is always the case with conquests, a top priority when they stormed Kabul was taking over state TV. In a country turned upside down in a day, a 31-year-old Taliban administrator is now responsible for informing and trying to reassure the nation. So people have no reason to be frightened?
No.
The people should not be afraid of us. All those who spent the last 20 years fighting us, killing and injuring us, bombarding us, we have forgiven them for the sake of nation.
The state broadcaster is one of 6 stations still on air here. Before the Taliban takeover, there were 30. When the Taliban last ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001, They frowned upon television and imagery in general. Wind forward to today and they're embracing 21st century technology. The key question, of course, is has the message changed? Another network called Women's Television pulled the plug on Sunday, ending transmissions because they felt threatened by the Taliban. Of the 50 women who worked in front of and behind the cameras, Zara Nabi is the only one still trying to do her job using social media. How frightened are you?
Frightened?
Scared?
Yeah, I'm scared also. Of course, I'm a human. Everyone is scared, too much. It's important. If I run away, it means all of us run away. So they say we success.
The studio is in a high-rise building from which we could see the evacuation process continue. I asked Zara about the future of her country under Taliban rule.
And right now they're a little bit calm. They're saying, still they're calm, everyone is scared. So imagine if they took complete control, they won't allow us even to talk at home between each other.
If she's right, then a new dark age really has descended here. John Irvine, News at 10, Kabul.
Reports of door-to-door searches by Taliban are not just coming from Kabul. One German broadcaster said tonight the home of one of its journalists had been targeted in the western Afghan city of Herat. One of his relatives was shot dead. Tuesday already seems a long time ago when Taliban leaders said they wouldn't be settling old scores. We've also learned that 20 interpreters who were already living in the UK have become trapped on their return to bring back their families.
The Taliban claims it's preserving hard-fought freedoms in Afghanistan. Yet when these brave souls tried to march through Kabul to mark the Independence Day of the recently fallen republic, holding aloft its flag, the response from the Taliban was instant and brutal. This is the image the Taliban's increasingly slick PR machine wanted reporters to see, proof they claimed that girls could still go to school. But the reality is far darker. At the airport last night, Taliban patrols meted out beatings on women trying to escape. This footage was taken by an American trying to get out, but British citizens are also having to run the same gauntlet. We spoke to one former military translator who's one of 20 who came back temporarily for their families, all unable to escape.
When we went to the airport gate and I saw Taliban, they were beating women and they beat my friends as well.
So effectively you are trapped now?
Yeah, we are trapped. If they catch us, if they recognize we are working for the British troops, or we had been working for the British troops or American troops, because they are kind of brutal, and I don't know what's gonna happen with us.
Abdul Qadir Jalil is stranded in Kabul after flying in from Manchester to get married. He says the promises of the Taliban count for nothing after being beaten as he tried to get papers to leave.
They took me out from my car and start beating on me, and they say, why are you fleeing this country? Their spokesman's statements are completely different from their activities.
Those displaced from their homes by all this tumult are also fearful of the new regime. In one of Kabul's parks, the destitute camp, each with their own story of loss and suffering. Afghans may have realised they can't count on the West to safeguard their rights, but neither do they trust the Taliban. Those who grew up under their hardline rule in the 90s know what could be coming for this abandoned generation. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
President Biden has followed up his controversial assertion on Monday that Afghan forces didn't fight hard enough to save their own country with another one, that there would have been chaos whenever or however America had pulled out its forces. That's provided his critics with more ammunition. He's also backtracked on when the last troops will leave. He had set a deadline of the end of the month. Today, he said they would stay until all American citizens are out.
ABC News exclusive. The president's first interview since the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban.
The interview was void of contrition and short on clarity, but eventually an admission. American troops might need to remain in Afghanistan longer than first thought.
Americans should understand that troops might have to be there beyond August 31st.
No, Americans should understand that we're going to try to get it done before August 31st.
But if we don't, the troops will stay.
If we don't, we'll determine at the time who's left.
And
if there are American forces, if there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
Once again, he blamed the crisis on Afghans, on soldiers who didn't fight, on leaders who didn't stay. But the retired general who once led US forces in Afghanistan rejected that.
Were you surprised that there was no contrition from President Biden?
The collapse, yes, disastrous, hugely disappointing, heartbreaking, sad, tragic. But again, let's put this in the context and let's understand how this came about.
President Biden said the scenes in Kabul could not be blamed on him.
The idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened.
so for you, that was always priced into the decision?
Yes.
But in April, he promised an orderly exit.
We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
But we've all seen the pictures. We've seen those hundreds of people packed into a C-17. We've seen Afghans falling.
That was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
The images were taken 2 days before the interview, and the chaos continues.
It makes me feel like everything we did was for naught.
Veronica Hoyer served in the US Air Force in Afghanistan and echoes the frustrations of many veterans.
You know, I've been angry, I've been devastated, I've been ashamed. It's definitely very emotional over the weekend. I mean, all the way even through Monday, I've been crying out of shame and anger mostly, but obviously sadness, especially for the people.
The US military released this from the evacuation: a sleeping Afghan child wrapped in an Air Force uniform. But the picture is tightly cropped. It is the wider image that the Commander-in-Chief is having to defend. Rohit Kaptru, News at 10, Washington.
A short time ago, I spoke to John Irvine in Kabul, and he told me more about the situation there tonight.
Well, Rageh, I think things are going reasonably well inside the airport. The problem is the chaos and confusion just outside, created by thousands of Afghans flocking to the airport every day, most of them not deemed eligible for asylum. Now, the reason for this mayhem is the choreography's gone wrong. The withdrawal of Westerners and Afghans granted safe passage was supposed to be completed before the Taliban made it into Kabul. Under those circumstances, the embassies, including ours, would have stayed open to oversee the pullout. Instead, we've got this wretched situation whereby frightened Afghans are queuing hopelessly outside empty, mothballed embassies, buildings that had to be evacuated quickly because of the unforeseen speed of the Taliban advance. Now, the security situation is serious enough for the Americans to have brought in more than 5,000 soldiers, which is twice as many soldiers as they withdrew in the first place. Every day, Taliban gunmen are firing shots in the air to try to disperse the Afghan crowds. But the longer this goes on, the greater the potential for a mishap, like a Taliban fighter shooting into the crowd or an exchange of fire between the Taliban and Western troops. This isn't over yet.
It isn't, and that was John Irvine from Kabul with that update tonight. Back here, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has been fighting off demands for his resignation. Labour and the Lib Dems say he should have made a call from his holiday in Crete last Friday to his opposite number in Afghanistan, as his civil servants had asked. But a junior minister made the call instead.
The Foreign Secretary looked pretty relaxed arriving in Downing Street this morning.
Are you going to resign, Mr. Raab?
No. In case you missed it, he said no. The question arises because as the Taliban rolled into Kandahar on Friday, officials said Mr. Raab should phone his Afghan counterpart about evacuating former army interpreters. Mr. Raab asked a junior minister to do it instead, but his colleagues are standing by him.
If I'd received that advice on Friday, I would have not made the call, because what was important on Friday was not a call to a rapidly disintegrating Afghan government with no power at all.
But if the situation was that bad on Friday, shouldn't the Foreign Secretary have come back before Sunday?
Well, all I know is that over the weekend, we had a number of COBRA calls and calls to the Prime Minister. Foreign Secretary was on that call every time.
Mr. Raab had been dialing into those calls from this hotel in Crete, where he was on a family holiday. On Friday, according to the Daily Mail, Foreign Office advice said, "We recommend the Foreign Secretary urgently calls the Afghan Foreign Minister Hanif Atmar." But Mr. Raab delegated this to Lord Goldsmith, who apparently got through to Mr. Atmar on Saturday, by which time Taliban forces were reportedly 7 miles from Kabul. The city fell on Sunday, after which Mr. Raab left Crete, landing at Gatwick in the early hours of Monday.
I think he should have resigned already, but if he doesn't resign, then the Prime Minister has to grasp the scale of the anger about this and replace him with somebody who is 100% committed to the job and is going to get a grip on what is a very, very desperate situation.
The Foreign Secretary wasn't the only person caught out. On Sunday morning, the Prime Minister was seen hurrying back from a domestic break in Somerset. Today, the Foreign Office made sure Dominic Raab could be seen at his desk. How much difference a call from him at the weekend might have made, we will never know. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
One Afghan family which had only just begun a new life in Britain this summer has suffered the most awful tragedy. A 5-year-old boy has died after falling from the window of the hotel room they were staying in Sheffield. His father is thought to have worked in the British Embassy in Kabul. The Refugee Council says there must be a review of the accommodation offered to those escaping the Taliban. To other news now. In our reporting of Britain's housing crisis, we have seen the truly terrible conditions some people in social housing are living in. We've also heard account after account of complaints to landlords that go unresolved. Last week, the government set up an advisory panel on social housing, but of the 14 organisations invited, none is actually made up of any tenants. 11 of those organisations told us there should be a new national tenants body so their voices could be heard. As we are about to see, that is desperately needed.
So this is the bedroom where we sleep.
Adiola has worked hard to put a roof over her and her daughter's head, only for it to come crashing down around them.
In a matter of minutes, from dripping on the edges, the whole thing came down.
She was standing directly underneath what was initially a small leak, trying to catch the water, inches from where her 4-year-old usually sleeps.
This is what fell on you. I mean, that's heavy. I mean, that is... I can barely lift that up.
That fell.
That is
That landed on me. So luckily, it didn't fall above her cot. That would have killed her.
Instead, Adiola escaped with an injured arm.
I just don't understand.
In the moments afterwards, as she sat in shock, covered in plaster and paint, trying to work out how this had happened, it got worse.
This got full. Next thing I knew, I heard it drop.
All in the bath.
All in the bath, in the sink. It's all in the sink, all over the floor. Again, you can see the concrete's just piled in that corner. I feel like I've been treated like an animal. This isn't fair. I pay my rent, I pay my service charge, I pay my council tax. I don't understand anything about ceilings. You just assume that, you know...
They won't collapse.
That you know, it's safe.
But next door, Basil was not so shocked.
It's been happening for 7 years.
that I've been in here.
He says he's consistently reported leaks to the landlord, Lambeth Council.
Once it rains outside, it will rain in here.
But 3 weeks ago, on the same day Adeola's ceilings caved in, so too did his, in his kitchen and in his living room.
Before, if they attended to it, it would only be my house is the problem. Now this problem's gone to everybody's house. You know, it just falls on deaf ears, and then it gets to the point where you just give up. Even like now, it's like I've given up. I just can't be bothered no more. I just really can't. Oh, God.
Lambeth Council said it regrets the disruption caused by tenants at Holly's house and blamed this on recent heavy rain. The government has set up a new expert panel to improve social housing policy. ITV News contacted the 14 organisations on that panel. 11 told us what is really needed is a new national tenants body dedicated to representing tenants' interests, a proposal the government has so far dismissed. Jenny Osborne represents one of them.
I think Grenfell changed everything for everybody. But until we've got somewhere that tenants across this country know where they can go to, know where they can input to, and that the fact that when they raise issues at a national level, when we're seeing themes that are happening across the country, when they can raise those collectively, then I think we'll start to see some real change.
People can't live in slums.
But without that voice, they're forced to amplify their own. The residents of Charles Dickens' house in Tower Hamlets have been holding regular protests over conditions in their homes inside this 60s tower block. They showed us videos like this and the destruction that has followed. Ali says he's been reporting leaks in his kitchen for 3 years, but while he and his wife were making breakfast for their 2 children, it caved in.
This is not something new. I wrote to them, I wrote to every single local politician, MP. They like to put the service charge up year by year, but we are not getting the service.
The landlord, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, have apologised to Ali and say this latest leak is not linked to those he's previously reported. They've also pledged to improve conditions throughout this block. But tenants so often have little faith in the fixes that follow, and despite government promises to give them a greater voice, those promises remain only that, in a housing system they see as broken. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10.
More than a year and a half after the pandemic started, scientists are still discovering new things about the virus and the vaccines. Now, they've found that both the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer are good at protecting people from catching it and at reducing the symptoms. So far, so good. But they are not as good as they expected at stopping people who catch the Delta strain from passing it on.
My life has been drastically changed. I can't go to the theatre. I can't be free to hug my grandchildren.
Tina has a form of leukemia that makes her one of 500,000 people who are highly vulnerable to COVID because of a weakened immune system. For the same reason, her vaccination is unlikely to give her much protection.
I was so happy to have the vaccine and felt that I would have some protection. It was such a blow to hear that we probably haven't made any antibodies.
That's why, to protect people like Tina, vaccines for the rest of us are so important, like the over 16s now being invited for jabs. But today we learned that against the Delta variant, vaccines aren't quite as good at preventing us getting infected in the first place. 2 weeks after a second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, 85% of people were protected from infection, compared to 68% with AstraZeneca. After 3 months, effectiveness of Pfizer falls to 75%, compared to 61% for AstraZeneca.
We still get good protection against Delta.
What's more, the study found vaccinated people who do get infected are likely to be able to infect others.
The fact that you can get it with high levels of virus in the nose and throat suggests that, as many people have started to say, herd immunity may actually not be possible for this virus, and that unvaccinated people may continue to still be at risk of hospitalisation and death.
The finding means the government's vaccine booster programme may be crucial.
So we are going to have a booster scheme. It will start sometime in September. I couldn't tell you exactly when, because before we started, I think as people would expect, we need to get the final advice from our group of experts, our independent scientific and medical advisors.
Everyone else getting vaccinated has done a lot to protect Tina from the pandemic. But until COVID rates drop substantially, she won't feel safe in the outside world.
Tom Clark, News at 10.
Yet another of the Manchester United greats of the 1960s has been diagnosed with dementia. Denis Law, who is 81 now and one of the club's all-time top scorers, said in a statement that the time had come to address the situation while he can. He has two forms of dementia, vascular and Alzheimer's. One of his teammates, Sir Bobby Charlton, also has dementia. Another, Nobby Stiles, had it when he died last year.
From the kick, Denis Law, who just had a knock on the head, used his head to score Manchester's first.
The man known simply as the King. With a nickname like that, you get a sense of just how good Denis Law was in his prime. But today, the 81-year-old became the latest in a line of former players to confirm he too has been diagnosed with mixed dementia. In a statement, Denis Law said, "I know the road ahead will be hard, demanding, painful and ever-changing, and so ask for understanding and patience. I recognise how my brain is deteriorating and how my memory evades me when I don't want it to, and how this causes me distress in situations that are beyond my control."
Well, the centre is headed home by Denis Law.
There's clearly some kind of relationship between dementia and professional football. And I think it's important to stress that at the moment that relationship seems to be linked to professional footballers who have probably spent hours and hours and hours in football training, heading continually.
Denis Law gave Manchester United the best of his career, starring alongside Sir Bobby Charlton and George Best, the United Trinity. From their 1968 European Cup winning squad, Denis Law is now the sixth member to be diagnosed with dementia. He follows Nobby Stiles and Bobby Charlton, as well as Bill Foulkes, Tony Dunn and David Herd. Former West Bromwich Albion player Jeff Astle died with dementia. His daughter has been campaigning for the people who run the game to give more protection.
Players are dying and they need to do something about that. So what happened to my dad, the diagnosis of Denis, we don't want these players just to be a statistic, and we certainly don't want this happening to players in the future.
In his announcement today, Denis Law showed he still has his humour when he said he's going to tackle this head-on, excuse the pun. And as many a defender will tell you, when Denis Law goes at anything head-on, the game is far from over. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
Finally, only one painting has ever been stolen from the National Gallery in London. It happened 60 years ago and made headlines around the world. It even appeared in a James Bond film, and the story has been made into a film of its own. The painting was of the Duke of Wellington. The person who took it was a taxi driver. He did ask for a ransom, but it wasn't for money for himself. Intrigued? Certainly his name was intriguing. Kempton Bunton.
Leaning in for a closer look, but very few visitors to the National Gallery have any idea about the extraordinary story behind this portrait of the Duke of Wellington.
When a place like the National Gallery loses a treasure like Goya's portrait of the first Duke of Wellington, that's really sensational news. Alarming, too.
In 1961, the painting by Goya was a star attraction. The British government had paid £140,000 after it was sold at auction. Within weeks, it was stolen. Exactly 60 years after the Goya was taken from its easel, I was given a glimpse of the police posters offering a reward of £5,000, along with ransom notes sent by the thief.
It had pride of place at the gallery's entrance.
Good evening.
It's the first thing you've seen when you entered and walked up the steps. The idea was that if there was any flood or fire, the painting could be very quickly removed and taken to a place of safety. They hadn't necessarily anticipated the fact that a thief was going to come into the gallery to relieve us of it.
Nearly 4 years later, Kempton Bunton, a retired bus driver, solved the mystery by handing himself in. He'd left the painting unharmed in a luggage locker at Birmingham Station.
Kempton Bunton.
A British comedy due to be released next year suggests his motive was to raise money for war veterans, so they didn't have to pay for TV licenses.
He is not a thief. He borrowed your Goya to do a bit of good in this world.
The jury cleared him.
It may have been turned into a comedy, but at the time this picture was stolen, it was no laughing matter for the National Gallery. A considerable amount of money had been spent on acquiring it, and just a few weeks later, it had gone.
Police believed a major criminal gang was involved. The missing painting became so notorious it earned a cameo role in the James Bond film Dr. No. The anniversary of a famous theft may just give this old master a new lease of life. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
What an amazing story. And that is it for tonight from me. Good night and thanks for watching.